The SEC could go and say, Judge, this is a major issue. We think you got it wrong. There's a lot of inconsistency. We're asking you to certify that this goes up. I think that unless Ripple is going to concede and agree with the SEC that it should go up earlier, I don't see it going up earlier.
In today's video, Attorney John Deaton discussed the latest with the SEC Ripple XRP lawsuit, the recent summary judgments from Ripple and the SEC, and what's next for the procedural process, likelihood of a settlement soon.
Is it possible that we'll see an appeal on the question of whether or not Ripple is a security aside from the institutional sales component?
Yes, well, I have to correct you, say XRP, not Ripple, is a security. Just if I didn't, the XRP holders would crucify me.
Yes.
Or not. It happens.
But by the way, let's talk about the distinction between Ripple and XRP, since you make the point, and it is a very important one.
Well, yes. If Ripple could go back and change one thing in its history, this is me speculating, I would imagine that it would be not to call the XRP token the Ripple token in the very beginning, because people use Ripple and XRP on exchanges. When it was listed, sometimes it would say Ripple and then parentheses XRP. And so there's a distinction between the token, which is the native crypto asset of the XRP ledger. Just say the blockchain, like ETH is Ethereum, Bitcoin is Bitcoin network. And so Ripple is the company that sells software that's trying to replace SWIFT, the payment messaging and system in the world. And so Ripple is the company. And so that issue that you were talking about is that interlocutory appeal. It is, the SEC could go and say, Judge, this is a major issue. We think you got it wrong. There's a lot of inconsistency. We're asking you to certify that this goes up. But if I'm Ripple, now here's the thing, Ash, if I represent Ripple or the executives, am I going to object to that or agree, yes, let's go get it up to the Second Circuit and possibly get a worse ruling? Or am I going to say, wait, this has been hanging over our head, these two executives, for 2.5 years. That doesn't count the 30 months that they were under investigation. So really, we're at 5 years that this has been hanging over these two executives. They have their right in court, Judge, before we go up on appeal. All you did was apply the standard test that we all agreed to. The SEC came to you and said, apply the Howey test and you'll determine that XRP is a security. You did. They don't like the result. We shouldn't have an appeal immediately. That's what I would do. That's what I would do. And so I think that unless Ripple is going to concede and agree with the SEC that it should go up earlier, I don't see it going up earlier.
Oh, very interesting. And I think that clarifies the question for a lot of people. John, I want to jump in here because we're about to run out of time, but I want to get at least a few questions in. Maybe we could do a speed round, some really quick answers here.
I'll try to make it short.
For some of these questions, because I know our viewers have a lot of them, and unfortunately we're running out of time. The first one comes to us from Ralph on the Real Vision website. Is it better to consider whether someone has entered a securities transaction rather than to try to define the thing they're trading as a security? Very interesting question from Ralph.
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Is it better to consider whether someone has entered a securities transaction rather than trying to define the thing they're trading as a security?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what this judge did. It's the circumstances surrounding the sale that matter, not the underlying asset. And the Howey case said the same thing, actually. The Supreme Court said that whether or not the underlying asset is speculative or has intrinsic value is immaterial. It's all about the circumstances surrounding the sale.
Didn't Ethereum do the same thing as Ripple in the beginning? I think he's talking about the pre-sale.
Yeah, well, actually, the Ethereum was a pure ICO, initial coin offering, where the blockchain wasn't even yet developed. They sold the token, used the money, and built the enterprise out. In the Hinman speech, he even had to say, setting aside the fundraising that accompanied the ICO, and then he went on to say Ethereum's not a security. So any securities lawyer would agree with you that the ICO by ETH Ethereum was in fact violated the law.
Okay, Bear Bull on YouTube. What happens to those direct buyers from Ripple? How are they made whole? That's an interesting question.
Well, that's the thing. That's where people get into the inconsistency. The direct buyers are the hedge funds and institutional investors, right? So who's going to shed a tear for them? That's why a lot of people, that's why your question was so relevant about the inconsistencies or it's perverse and whatnot. The penalty phase is what's next. Unless there's an interlocutory appeal, which I don't think, then there's going to be a hearing and some litigation and briefs about what's the appropriate remedy. But certainly no one's going to be like usually at this point in time crying for VCs, right? They knew what they bargained for what they got.
How will banks get XRP to utilize, and can Ripple still sell to exchanges? So it's a question, I think, about the nature of how institutions will obtain these tokens if they are not allowed to do so through institutional sales.
No, that's a great question as well, because the one thing that I would say that seemed inconsistent with me in the decision by Judge Torres was that she grouped Ripple's on-demand liquidity program with institutional sales because they are by contract and whatnot. But when you look at what on-demand liquidity is, the acquirer only acquires XRP as a bridge asset between fiat currencies. And so they then sell it. So they only own XRP for 3 to 5 seconds or however long the transaction takes. And so there's an argument, how do they rely on the efforts of Ripple if in fact they're selling it immediately after utilizing it as a bridge asset? And so that's a great question, because a bank right now would say, well, according to this ruling, I can't buy from Ripple, but they can buy off Coinbase in exchange. And so right. It's a matter of, there's a way for Ripple to survive. And these banks, if they want to utilize XRP, they just go on exchange and buy it.
John, this has been an incredible conversation. I think we've learned a lot. I know I have. Final thoughts, key takeaways that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
I'd like to leave them with this, that when you feel strong about something, you can make a difference, Ash. And, you know, in this decision, there are 2 footnotes or 2 citations. One is the library hearing that I attended on behalf of Naomi Brockwell. And the judge cited where the judge told me he wasn't going to apply his order to secondary market sales. That's a footnote in this decision. And then there's also a citation where the judge cited the 3,600 affidavits that we submitted on behalf of XRP holders. And so, you know, there was a lot of people who, you know, were questioning, why are we doing this? And these Naomi Brockwell XRP holders who decided that they wanted to be heard were actually heard and made a difference. It's in the proof. She didn't have to cite those things, and she did. And so I would just encourage people to, you know, always, if you see something, have the courage to speak up, because you can make a difference.